Montana Territory, 1873. The sun had been unforgiving all day, baking the small frontier town of Riverbend until the wooden boardwalks felt like hot coals beneath tired boots. Dust hung in the air, painting everything a muted gold in the late afternoon light. Pamela Lowry stood at the window of her father's modest homestead, her slender fingers twisting the fabric of her faded blue calico dress. At 20 years old, she had spent her entire life in this small house, watching her father's debts grow as surely as the wheat in their failing fields. Her honey-blonde hair was pulled back in a simple braid, revealing a face that still maintained its youth despite the hardships they had endured. In the reflection of the glass, she caught her own blue eyes, wide with fear at what tomorrow would bring. Tomorrow, the auction. Her father had spoken the words so matter-of-factly at supper the previous evening. "I have arranged a bride auction for you, Pamela. 5 men have already placed bids. The highest bidder will take you as wife, and his money will save our farm." She had not cried then. There had been something in his voice, desperation perhaps, or shame, that had kept her tears at bay. But now, alone with her reflection, she allowed one to slip down her cheek. "A woman is not meant for auctioning," she whispered to herself. "We are not cattle or horses." But in Riverbend, with no mother to protect her and no prospects of her own, what choice did she have? The frontier was no place for a woman alone. That much she knew with certainty. She had seen what happened to unmarried women who tried to make their way without protection. Poverty, destitution, or worse awaited them. Better a loveless marriage than starvation, she told herself for the 100th time. But the thought rang hollow in her heart. 20 miles away, Samuel Crane removed his hat as he entered the weather-beaten trading post at the crossroads. At 26, he had spent the last 8 years working cattle drives, saving every penny. His tall, lean frame carried the strength earned through honest labor, though his handsome face with its day-old stubble and thoughtful green eyes suggested a gentleness that seemed at odds with the harsh landscape around him. "Afternoon, Mrs. Hodgkins," he said, nodding to the storekeeper's wife. "That land parcel north of Riverbend. Has anyone claimed it yet?" The older woman squinted at him. "You're still fixed on settling down then? Thought you cowpunchers lived for the open trail." Samuel placed a leather pouch on the counter. 8 years of savings, nearly every dollar he'd earned driving cattle from Texas to Montana. "Not me. A man needs roots, a place to build something that lasts." The truth was, Samuel had seen too many lonely deaths on the trail. Old cowboys with nothing but memories and regrets, dying without a hand to hold or eyes to mourn them. The open range had taught him everything he knew, but it had also shown him what he feared most: dying alone, forgotten, with nothing to show for his years but calloused hands and trailed dust. "That land needs a family to make it whole," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "Just like a man does." Mrs. Hodgkins smiled knowingly. "Well, Mr. Crane, you might be interested to know there's a bride auction happening in Riverbend tomorrow. Old man Lowry is selling his daughter to settle his debts." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Selling his daughter? Like livestock?" "It's not uncommon in these parts when times get hard," she replied with a shrug. "Pretty girl, too. Pamela's her name. Golden hair, they say, and kind to everyone. Shame about her situation." That night, Samuel camped under the stars, unable to sleep. The concept of a bride auction turned his stomach. Yet he knew the harsh realities of frontier life sometimes forced desperate choices. He had seen families broken by poverty, debt, and the unforgiving land. Still, the thought of a woman being sold to the highest bidder. By dawn, he had made his decision. He would ride to Riverbend. The town square of Riverbend buzzed with anticipation as Pamela stood on the small wooden platform, her eyes fixed on a distant point, refusing to meet the gazes of the men gathered below. Her father stood beside her, his face a mask of determination masking shame. "Gentlemen," Wallace Lowry announced, his voice carrying across the square, "as advertised, I offer my daughter's hand in marriage to settle my debts of $500. The bidding starts at that amount." Pamela's heart hammered against her ribs. 5 men stood before her: a widower with children who needed a mother, 2 wealthy ranchers old enough to be her father, a merchant from the next town over, and the banker who held her father's loans. None looked at her with anything resembling tenderness. 520, called the banker, a thin smile on his lips. 550, countered one of the ranchers. The bidding continued, each amount driving home the reality of her situation. These men were not bidding for her heart or even her companionship. They wanted a cook, a housekeeper, someone to warm their beds and bear their children. Her worth was being calculated in dollars and cents. The figure climbed past 700 when a commotion at the edge of the crowd caught her attention. A young man on horseback had arrived, dismounting with fluid grace. He removed his hat as he approached, revealing tousled brown hair. Even from a distance, Pamela could see the intensity in his eyes as he assessed the scene before him. $800, called the banker, looking triumphantly around the crowd. The newcomer stepped forward. I offer something different, he said, his voice clear and steady. The crowd parted as he approached the platform. Pamela found herself looking into the most honest eyes she'd ever seen, green as spring grass after rain. My name is Samuel Crane, he announced, addressing both Pamela and her father. I don't have $800 to offer, but I have a claim to 160 acres of good land north of here. I have 2 strong horses, a wagon, and building supplies. I have 8 years of honest work behind me, and, God willing, many more ahead. He looked directly at Pamela then. Most importantly, I offer respect. I offer partnership, not ownership. I offer my heart instead of just my wallet. Wallace Lowry frowned. This is a cash auction, young man. Samuel nodded. I understand, sir. I have $300 in cash, everything I have after purchasing my land claim. But I'm offering your daughter a choice. Not just a bidder, but a future she has some say in. Pamela's breath caught in her throat. Choice. Such a simple word, yet in that moment, it felt revolutionary. All her life, she had done what was expected. Duty, obligation, necessity. But choice? That was something no one had ever offered her. This is highly irregular, the banker protested. I have bid $800. Samuel kept his eyes on Pamela. Miss Lowry, I won't pretend to love you when we've just met. But I promise to try to earn your affection every day. I promise you'll never be property on my land. You'll be its heart. The crowd had gone silent. Her father shifted uncomfortably beside her. Papa, Pamela said quietly, finding her voice at last. May I speak with Mr. Crane? Privately. After a moment's hesitation, her father nodded. Under the shade of an old oak tree, with the town watching from a distance, Pamela studied the stranger who had disrupted her auction. Why would you do this? She asked. You don't know me. Samuel glanced toward the platform. I know what it's like to have no choices. I worked cattle drives since I was 18, taking orders, sleeping in the dirt, watching good men die with nothing and no one to call their own. He met her eyes again. No person should be sold like property, not even on the frontier. I cannot offer love, she said carefully. I'm not asking for it. Not today. He gestured to the land beyond the town. The territory is harsh. 2 people working together stand a better chance than one alone. I need a partner, not a servant. Pamela looked down at her hands. $300 won't save my father's farm. No, Samuel agreed. But it might buy him time to find another way. One that doesn't cost you your freedom. When they returned to the platform, Pamela faced her father. Papa, I choose Mr. Crane's offer. A murmur ran through the crowd. The banker stepped forward. Lowry, I'm offering more than twice his amount. You'd be a fool to accept. Wallace Lowry looked from his daughter to the young cowboy, then to the banker. 8 years of drought, failed crops, and mounting debts had brought him to this desperate place. But something in the young man's steady gaze reached him. My daughter has made her choice, he said finally. I'll take the 300. The banker's face darkened. You'll regret this, Lowry. I'll foreclose within the month. 2 days later, Pamela sat beside Samuel in his wagon, her few possessions packed in a trunk behind them. The parting with her father had been tearful but resolute. With the banker's threats looming, he had decided to sell the failing farm and seek work in the growing railroad towns to the east. Are you certain about this? Samuel asked as they left Riverbend behind. Marrying a stranger is a heavy burden. Pamela watched the familiar landscape recede. Is that what we're doing? Marrying. Samuel's hands tightened on the reins. That was the arrangement at the auction. But I meant what I said. I won't force anything on you. We could start as neighbors, if you prefer. I could build you a separate cabin on the property. The gesture touched her unexpectedly. That would take twice the work. Some things are worth the effort, he replied simply. As the wagon crested a hill, Samuel drew the horses to a halt. There, he said, pointing to a valley below where a creek cut through rolling grassland. That's our claim. 160 acres under the Homestead Act. Our claim. The words sounded strange to Pamela's ears. She had never owned anything, never had a place that was partly hers by right. It's beautiful, she said truthfully. It's empty, Samuel replied. Just land. No shelter yet. No fences, no crops. Nothing but potential. Pamela looked at him. Like us. Their first weeks together established a rhythm of hard work and cautious courtesy. Samuel erected a tent for himself while building a small but sturdy one-room cabin. He insisted Pamela take the cabin once it was finished, while he continued to sleep under canvas. They worked from dawn till dusk, Samuel cutting logs, building fences, and preparing land for planting, while Pamela established their modest household. They spoke little at first, their conversations limited to practical matters. We should go to town tomorrow for supplies, Samuel said one evening as they ate a simple supper outside the cabin. Autumn was approaching, bringing cooler nights. I can make a list of what we need, Pamela replied, noticing how the firelight played across his features. In these weeks of labor, she had come to appreciate his steadiness, his consideration. He never raised his voice, never made demands, and always asked her opinion on decisions that would affect them both. In town the next day, they encountered the banker who had bid against Samuel at the auction. His cold eyes followed them as they loaded supplies into their wagon. I heard your father left for good, he said to Pamela, approaching them in the street. Sold his land for a pittance and ran east with his tail between his legs. Samuel stepped forward. Mr. Lowry made his choice, just as we made ours. The banker sneered. And how is your arrangement working out? Playing house out on that barren claim? Winter's coming, Crane. The territory doesn't forgive the unprepared. After the banker walked away, Pamela noticed Samuel's thoughtful expression. What is it? She asked. He's right about one thing, Samuel said. Winter will be hard. We need to be legally married before then. Pamela's stomach tightened. For propriety's sake? For practical reasons, he clarified. If something happens to either of us, the other needs legal rights to the land and property. Everything I build for both of us. But the law only recognizes that if we're married. She hadn't considered this aspect of their arrangement. When, next supply trip, if you're willing, we can see the circuit preacher. 2 weeks later, they stood before Reverend Mills in his small church in Riverbend. Pamela wore her best dress, faded blue calico, freshly washed and pressed. Samuel had traded a day's labor at the livery for the loan of a proper suit coat. Their vows were simple, traditional words repeated by countless couples, yet Pamela felt the weight of each promise. To honor, to cherish, in sickness and health. You may kiss the bride, the Reverend pronounced when they had finished. Samuel hesitated, then leaned forward and placed the gentlest of kisses on her cheek. The gesture, so respectful of boundaries they had not yet crossed, brought unexpected tears to Pamela's eyes. That night, back at their homestead, Samuel insisted on maintaining their previous arrangement. Nothing changes unless you want it to, he told her as he prepared to return to his tent. Samuel, she said, stopping him. You built this cabin. You shouldn't sleep outside with winter coming. He studied her face. What are you suggesting? We could share the cabin. It's small, but... She took a deep breath. We are married now. Samuel stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cooling evening air. Pamela, a piece of paper doesn't change what's in your heart. I meant what I said. I'll wait until you're ready, if you're ever ready. And if I'm never ready? She asked, needing to know the boundaries of his patience. Then I'll have a partner, a friend, and that's more than many men find in this life. He smiled, a gentle curve of his lips that reached his eyes. I'd rather have your friendship freely given than anything else taken. That night, they slept in the cabin together, Samuel on a bedroll on the floor, Pamela on the narrow bed he had built. A respectful distance separated them, but something had shifted between them. Trust, fragile as a seedling, had taken root. As autumn deepened, they fell into a comfortable rhythm of work and quiet evenings. Samuel taught Pamela to shoot his Winchester rifle, just in case, he said, and she showed him how to make bread using the sourdough starter she had brought from her father's house. My mother made this starter, she told him as they worked side by side at the rough-hewn table. She's been gone 10 years now, but something of her lives on in it. Samuel watched her hands as they kneaded the dough. Tell me about her. No one had asked Pamela about her mother in years. The stories poured from her, memories of songs and lessons, of gentle hands and fierce protection. She sounds remarkable, Samuel said when she finished. Like her daughter. The compliment warmed her more than she expected. One clear October day, Samuel returned from checking their property boundaries to find Pamela standing outside, staring at the horizon with a troubled expression. What is it? He asked. Smoke, she said, pointing. A lot of it, from the direction of the Peterson place. They rode hard toward their neighbor's homestead, a family with 3 young children who had settled 10 miles away the previous spring. As they crested the final hill, Pamela's heart sank. The cabin was engulfed in flames, and figures on horseback were riding away, at least 4 men. Raiders, Samuel said grimly, urging his horse forward. The scene at the homestead was grim. The cabin couldn't be saved, and worse, they found Mr. Peterson's body near the well, a bullet wound in his chest. Of Mrs. Peterson and the children, there was no sign. They've taken them, Samuel said, examining tracks around the property. Likely headed north toward the border. We have to go after them, Pamela insisted, already turning her horse. Samuel caught her reins. It's too dangerous. We need to get the sheriff. That will take hours. They'll be gone. Pamela, Samuel said firmly, I understand. But 2 people against 4 armed raiders. They have children with them, she said, her voice breaking. Little Emma is only 4. Something changed in Samuel's expression. He nodded once. We'll follow their trail, but at a safe distance. Once we know where they're headed, I'll go for help while you keep watch. The tracks led them into increasingly rough country, following game trails through forested hills. After 2 hours, they spotted smoke from a camp in a sheltered ravine. Stay here, Samuel whispered as they dismounted and secured their horses. I'll get closer and see what we're dealing with. We'll both go, Pamela countered. 2 sets of eyes are better than 1. Samuel looked like he wanted to argue, but nodded instead. Stay low and quiet. They crept forward through the underbrush until they could see the camp. 4 men sat around a fire, passing a bottle. Mrs. Peterson and her children were huddled together near a fallen log, the mother's arms protectively around her frightened children. They're drunk, Pamela whispered. That gives us an advantage. Samuel studied the scene. I'll circle around and create a distraction. When they investigate, you get Mrs. Peterson and the children into those trees. He handed her his pistol. Use it if you have to. Be careful, she said, suddenly afraid for him. Samuel touched her hand briefly. I will. The look they exchanged contained emotions neither had voiced. The plan worked initially. Samuel created a commotion on the far side of the camp, drawing 3 of the raiders away. Pamela crept to Mrs. Peterson, urgently explaining their escape route. They had almost reached the trees when the 4th raider, who had been relieving himself in the bushes, stumbled upon them. Well, what have we here? He slurred, raising his rifle. Pamela stepped in front of Mrs. Peterson and the children, Samuel's pistol steady in her hands. Let them go. The man laughed. Another pretty one. Must be our lucky day. A shot rang out, and the raider crumpled to the ground. Samuel emerged from the trees, his Winchester smoking. Run, he shouted as shouts from the other raiders indicated their return. What followed was chaos, gunfire, the children's terrified cries, and a desperate race through darkening woods. Somehow they reached their horses, with Mrs. Peterson carrying her youngest and Pamela helping the older 2. They rode hard, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them. Hours later, they reached their homestead, exhausted but alive. Samuel immediately sent Mrs. Peterson and her children inside with Pamela while he stood watch for raiders who might have tracked them. Inside the cabin, as Pamela settled the traumatized family, Mrs. Peterson gripped her hand. You risked your lives for us, she said, tears streaming down her face. Why? Pamela thought of Samuel facing armed men without hesitation. Because out here, all we have is each other. Later that night, after Samuel had ridden to town and returned with the sheriff and a posse, after the raiders had been captured and Mrs. Peterson had cried herself to sleep alongside her children in the cabin's only bed, Pamela found Samuel sitting by the dying campfire outside. You should sleep, she said, sitting beside him. He shook his head. Every time I close my eyes, I see Peterson lying there. I see those children terrified. His voice was raw. I see you standing in front of that raider's gun. Pamela reached for his hand. I wasn't afraid. He admitted. I've never been more afraid in my life than when I saw you in that man's sights. The vulnerability in his voice touched something deep within her. You saved us. We saved them, he corrected. Together. She moved closer, resting her head against his shoulder. I think I understand now what you meant about partnership. His arm came around her hesitantly, then more confidently when she didn't pull away. What do you mean? When you offered your heart instead of money at that auction, I didn't understand what you were really offering. She looked up at him. It wasn't just about giving me a choice. It was about building something together that neither of us could build alone. Samuel's eyes reflected the dying firelight. Is that what we're doing? Building something together? Yes, she said simply. I think we are. That night, when they finally returned to the cabin, Pamela took Samuel's hand and led him to the bed. They lay together, fully clothed, his arms around her, her head on his chest. It wasn't passion that drove them, but something deeper, the need for connection after facing death together, the comfort of another heartbeat close by. As winter descended on the Montana territory, their small homestead transformed. Samuel completed a larger cabin before the first heavy snow, with 2 rooms and a proper stone fireplace. Together they preserved food, repaired equipment, and prepared for the isolated months ahead. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell softly outside, Samuel presented Pamela with a small carved wooden box. "What's this?" she asked, surprised. "Open it," he encouraged. Inside lay a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," he explained. "I've been carrying it since she died, waiting for—" He hesitated. Waiting for the right person. Pamela stared at the ring. "Samuel, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," he assured her. "I just wanted you to have it. We're already married in law, but I thought perhaps—" He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly uncertain. "I thought perhaps your hand deserved something more than emptiness." Pamela lifted the ring from the box, examining it in the firelight. "It's beautiful." She looked up at him. "Would you put it on me?" The moment was solemn, almost ceremonial, as he slid the ring onto her finger. When he finished, she didn't let go of his hand. "Samuel," she said softly, "I think I'm ready now." His eyes searched hers. "Ready?" She nodded, feeling a blush warm her cheeks. "To be your wife. In every way." That night, they truly became husband and wife, their union gentle and tender. Afterward, as they lay together in the darkness, Samuel traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice serious. "Something I should have told you before." Pamela propped herself up on one elbow, suddenly anxious. "What is it? Remember when we rescued the Petersons? How I knew what to do, how to track those raiders." He took a deep breath. "Before I was a cowboy, I rode with the Union Army Scouts. I've killed men, Pamela. In the war and after, hunting deserters and outlaws." She studied his face in the dim light. "You're afraid that changes how I see you? Some would say it makes me dangerous. I would say it made you capable of saving for innocent lives," she countered. "We all have pasts, Samuel." She hesitated, then decided to share her own truth. "My mother didn't die of fever, as my father told everyone. She took her own life after years of his drinking and rages." Samuel pulled her closer. "I'm so sorry. I stayed because I had nowhere else to go," she admitted. "That's why I understood those raiders' captives so well. I know what it is to be trapped." "You're not trapped anymore," he promised. "Not with me." By February, their supplies were running low. A series of blizzards had isolated them for weeks, and game had been scarce. "I need to try for town," Samuel said one morning, looking at their dwindling stores. "The weather's cleared enough. I could make it there and back in 3 days if I push hard." Pamela didn't want him to go, but knew they had little choice. "Promise me you'll be careful." He kissed her deeply before mounting his horse. "I promise." 3 days. 5 days passed with no sign of Samuel. On the 6th morning, as Pamela was chopping wood, a task they usually shared, she heard the approach of horses. Plural. Multiple riders. Heart pounding, she retrieved the Winchester from inside the cabin and took up position by the woodpile, which offered some cover. 3 riders appeared on the ridge. 2 she didn't recognize, but the third. "Samuel!" she cried, dropping the rifle and running forward. He dismounted awkwardly, and she saw with horror that his coat was bloodied. his face pale beneath a layer of trail dirt. "What happened?" she demanded as the other men helped him toward the cabin. "Ambush," one of them explained as they eased Samuel onto the bed. "Outlaws hit him on the trail back from town. We found him half-frozen 2 miles south. Bullet went clean through his shoulder, but he's lost blood and caught fever." For 3 days, Pamela barely left Samuel's side, fighting the fever with cool compresses and the infection with herbs she'd learned to use from her mother. The men who had brought him home, a pair of trappers heading north, helped where they could before continuing their journey. On the fourth night, as a fresh storm howled outside, Samuel's fever finally broke. Pamela, exhausted from her vigil, wept with relief when his eyes opened, clear and lucid for the first time. "Hey now," he whispered hoarsely. "No tears. I thought I was going to lose you," she admitted, clasping his hand. "It takes more than outlaws to separate me from you," he said with a weak smile. As he recovered, Samuel told her what had happened. "It was the banker from Riverbend, Harmon. He hired those men to waylay me. Said it was payment for me stealing his auction prize." Pamela felt cold dread settle in her stomach. "He did this because of me?" "No," Samuel said firmly, taking her hand. "He did this because he's a man who believes money should buy anything or anyone he wants. You were never property to be stolen." By spring, Samuel had recovered enough to help with planting. Their first year's crops were modest but crucial: wheat, corn, and vegetables that would sustain them and provide seed for the following year. They added 4 milk cows and a small flock of chickens purchased with the last of Samuel's savings. "We're going to make it," Pamela said one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sun set over fields they had planted together. "Was there ever any doubt?" Samuel asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Every day at first," she admitted with a laugh. "But not anymore." Summer brought their first real test as a married couple. Drought settled over the territory, the creek on their property shrinking to a trickle. Weeks passed without rain, the newly planted crops withering under the relentless sun. "We could lose everything," Samuel said one night, his voice tight with worry. Pamela touched his face. "Not everything. Never everything." Together, they worked from dawn until dusk, hauling water from the deeper pools that remained in the creek bed, creating irrigation ditches, and shading the most vulnerable plants. They saved enough of the crops to see them through another winter, though with little surplus. In late August, as they harvested what remained of their wheat crop, Pamela collapsed in the field. Samuel carried her to the cabin, fear evident in every line of his face. "What is it?" he asked, pressing a cool cloth to her forehead. "Tell me what hurts." She smiled despite her exhaustion. "Nothing hurts. I'm just tired more easily these days." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "We're going to have a baby, Samuel." The transformation in his expression was immediate, shock giving way to wonder, then pure joy. "A baby? Are you certain?" She nodded. "Come spring, we'll be 3 instead of 2. He gathered her carefully into his arms, pressing his forehead to hers. "I love you," he whispered. "I've loved you since the moment you chose me at that auction. And I love you," she replied, realizing the truth had been in her heart for months. "Not because you saved me, but because you saw me as worth saving." The winter of 1874 was harsh but beautiful. Samuel insisted Pamela rest more as her pregnancy advanced, taking on extra chores himself. He transformed a corner of their cabin into a nursery, crafting a cradle from the same pine he had used for their bed. In February, a visitor arrived, the circuit-riding preacher who had married them the previous year. "I bring news," Reverend Mills said after accepting their hospitality. "Harrison Harmon, the banker from Riverbend, has been arrested for conspiracy in your ambush, Mr. Crane. It seems one of his hired men confessed when facing the gallows for another crime." Samuel exchanged a look with Pamela. "Justice comes eventually, I suppose." "There's more," the preacher continued. "Word has spread about how you two rescued the Peterson family. The territorial governor has taken notice. There's talk of appointing a marshal for this region, someone who knows the land and has proven their courage." Samuel shook his head. "I'm a homesteader now, not a lawman." Later, after the preacher had gone, Pamela found Samuel staring thoughtfully into the fire. "You're considering it, aren't you?" she asked. "The marshal position." He sighed. "Part of me is. I was good at tracking, at bringing people to justice. But I have you now. A child on the way. It would mean danger." Pamela sat beside him. Life here is already dangerous. At least as Marshal, you'd be making it safer for everyone, including our child. He looked at her with surprise. You'd support such a decision? I married a man who offered his heart when others offered only money, she said. That heart includes a desire to protect others. I won't ask you to bury that part of yourself. In April, as the first wildflowers bloomed across their land, Pamela gave birth to a daughter they named Hope. Samuel, who had faced armed outlaws without flinching, wept openly when the midwife placed the tiny bundle in his arms. She has your eyes, Pamela said tiredly from the bed. And your strength, he replied, sitting beside her. She'll need it in this territory. 2 weeks later, Samuel accepted the position of territorial marshal, with the condition that his headquarters would be established in the growing settlement near their homestead. It allowed him to continue working their land while serving the broader community. By the autumn of 1875, their homestead had transformed. The original cabin had been expanded again, a proper barn raised with the help of neighbors, and their fields produced enough surplus to sell at market. Samuel's reputation as a fair but firm marshal spread throughout the territory, bringing a new stability to the region. On the anniversary of their wedding, Samuel took Pamela to the ridge overlooking their property. Little Hope, now 6 months old, slept peacefully in her mother's arms. I want to show you something, he said, pointing toward the horizon. See that line of wagons? Those are new settlers. The railroad's coming through 50 miles south, and people are flocking to claim land. Pamela watched the distant wagons. Our quiet frontier is changing. For the better, I think. Schools will come. Churches. Doctors. He turned to her. Our daughter will have opportunities we never did. Pamela leaned against him, their daughter between them. Do you ever think about that auction day? How different our lives might have been. Samuel nodded. Every day? If I hadn't heard about it from Mrs. Hodgkins, if I hadn't decided to ride to Riverbend, if I hadn't found the courage to choose an uncertain future with a stranger over the security of the highest bidder, she added. Was it the right choice? He asked, a smile playing at his lips. He already knew her answer. Pamela looked out over their land, the fields they had planted together, the house they had built room by room, the community that had grown around them. She thought of the hundreds of moments, large and small, that had transformed them from cautious strangers into partners, lovers, parents. The best choice, she said, reaching up to touch his face. You offered your heart instead of your wallet, and that has made all the difference. As they stood together on the ridge, their daughter stirred and opened her eyes, blue like her mother's, set in a face that held her father's gentle determination. Below them, their homestead stood as testament to what they had built together, not just a farm or a family, but a life where choices were freely made and love freely given. In the end, Pamela reflected, it wasn't about being sold to the highest bidder or being saved by a handsome cowboy. It was about two people finding in each other the courage to build something new on the frontier, something neither could have created alone. That was the true value of Samuel's offer on that auction day, not just freedom from one fate, but the chance to choose a new one together. One heartbeat, one harvest, one hope at a time.